So as usual, I'm early, and I was going to wait the other 5 minutes to start, but I thought, you know what, it's been 2 weeks again since I've seen you, which is really too long, and these are big, long chapters that a lot has happened in, so I figured I would start and we could chat and say hello, and then we can start, as people come in. Let me, I always forget this, live chat, there we go. So that hopefully I can see chat as it comes in. So anyway, first of all, hello, welcome to Miss of Avalon Book Club. Tonight we are going over chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. We had 4 chapters to read in the last 2 weeks. Hi, Kimmy. Hi, Stephen. So it was a tough 2 weeks for me. Hi, Nadine. Because of where we were. It's funny, on my journey, we have really not had great weather. We did, for a little while, we were in South Texas. Hi, Jess. And so we had good weather down there, but it's been really cold. I really have to say I have felt kind of cursed since we left. But because the cold weather has followed us this year, and everywhere we go, we have people who say, we've been here for 20 years and we've never seen it this cold, and snow, and like Texas had snow and cold, and Arizona had cold, and Nevada had cold, and we were just in Las Vegas and that was cold. So it has been a weird 6 months, and so we have made it all the way across America, though, and we are now in California. And I have to say, this is nice. Now, apparently, the weather that we are experiencing here is much colder than usual here also, but it's like 68, 69, I think, today, and then it's supposed to keep going up. But finally, we have some decent weather. Hi, Fatima. So I'm excited because with that decent weather comes more videos. I have been waiting and trying really hard to outline. I have tons of outlines for new videos. But I haven't been filming them because the weather has sucked, and because we're in this tiny RV, I don't have a whole lot. Hi, Kay, how are you? I don't have a whole lot of room indoors to do videos because there's 3 of us in our RV. We only have a 31 footer, and so I don't have a whole lot of space indoors. So I really have to wait until there's decent weather to be able to do my videos, because they really need to be done outside, because it's not like I can tell my my dad and Peter, my husband, to get the hell out and go outside, or shut up and don't make any noise, or California, maybe the big one, has been waiting your arrival. Don't say that too loud. I swear to you, my dad is like, I hate California, and he keeps saying, like, we'll probably drop off into the ocean while we're here. I'm like, would you just enjoy it? This is the first nice weather we've had since we left the very south of Texas, when we were in like Weslaco area. So, I mean, we had a couple days here and there, but for the most part, it's been really cold the last 6 months. And not that I'm complaining, because I know if I was home, I would have had way colder and all the snow and all that, and I get that. It's been hard because I wanted to do a whole bunch more videos, and that just hasn't been able to happen very much. So finally, we are here. We are in California. We're in Palm Springs, California right now. We will be here for 3 weeks, which is such a big help. And so, yay, finally, I can start recording some of the videos that I have been outlining for months and excited to do. So keep an eye on that. I have I figured I'm going to start with a reintroduction, which I recorded that once already, and I'm seeing footprints on the ceiling. Anyways, I recorded that once already. At least you're not in North Dakota. I know it. Poor Pookie. Every time I say something about the weather, Pookie's like, kiss off. Because he lives in North Dakota. And like last night, they had a huge blizzard. And those of you in Canada, I know a lot of you had a lot of snow last night, today. And so every time I say anything about weather, poor Pookie is like, fuck off. Okay, so be looking for, I'm going to have a reintroduction video, and I'm going to be starting the Beginner Witch series basically over again, and doing things a little differently because in my journey I have seen things and more things have come to light that I didn't know when I started. I realized recently that I have now done over 1,000 videos. Actually, I've done over 1,100 videos, I think it is. And I have been doing this March 4th or March 7th, I think, was 8 years. 8 years that I've been on YouTube. Footprints on the ceiling. Oh, it's because this is our screen room, and I take my shoes off when we put the poles in on the top so I don't ruin it, but obviously I had sand on my feet because I have bare feet on. So I have sand footprints on the ceiling. So yes, so I'm going to be restarting the Beginner Witch series because I've learned so much since then that not that I don't believe in what I did, but I want to tweak things a little bit, and I think I'll be talking about maybe some different things than I did the first time because I've learned so much and my journey has changed, my path has changed, and so it will be, some stuff will be kind of the same or similar, and some stuff will be a little different, I think. So I'm excited. And I have tons of notes, tons and tons and tons of notes about those videos. And so this week I hope to start filming those videos. I don't know if you guys want them to be live. I figured some of them will be live and some of them will not be live. I figured I would do like maybe a couple and then do a live to like have people ask questions, or we can talk about a topic and we can go back and forth or something like that. Hopefully. Because that way I don't want them to be as long as they would be probably if it was live, because I tend to ramble on when it's live a little bit. Yeah, just a little. But I don't see now. It sucks because you can't see very much. Oh, there you go. See, palm trees and sun and blue skies, and yay. So we are in Palm Springs, California. Actually, we're in Palm Desert, California, which is outside of Palm Springs, but this is where we're at. Yay. Okay. All right. So let me start with the prerequisite. We will be talking about, in this video, Mists of Avalon, chapters 12 through 15. So if you have not read them and you do not want spoilers, this is your chance to hop off. If you have not read them and you don't mind spoilers, then no problem. I just want to give all of those people an opportunity to hop off if they haven't read yet and they don't want a bunch of spoilers. Yes, a mixture is good. Thank you, Stephen. I figured. I'm really tempted to go live because that's my forte since I started going live. And I didn't know how to edit before, and I'm trying to learn how to edit. But I know that I tend to go really long, so I'm going to try to do a mixture of both. We had a massive, wonderful thunderstorm last night, freezing rain and thunderstorms all day too. Whoo! 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 I talked to my mother today, and they had a big thunderstorm too. So, okay, so let's start. We're going to start with chapter 12. Chapter 12 starts with Morgaine is now on the Isle of Avalon. She is training with Vivian and with all the priestesses in Avalon to be a priestess. And at the time that chapter 12 starts, it is 9 years after Morgaine first came to Avalon. So it kind of jumps ahead. So we don't see a lot of her training. We get to hear a little bit of it as the book goes on. That's one thing that I have to say that I have not done, and I brought the next book with me. This book is actually kind of a series. And the next book is called It has to do with the training. Probably doesn't say here. It's called like the House of the Priestess people. I can't remember what it's called right now, but I actually did bring it with me. So when we're done with this, if you guys want to continue on, I have never read the books after this, although I own them. So I would be interested in keeping going, but we'll see when this is done. Okay, so it is 9 years. The Forest House, baby. That might be it. It might be the Forest House. Yes, and I think that is more about the training of priestesses and stuff. At least that's the impression that I got when I read like the foreword or something. So 9 years after Morgaine comes to Avalon. When she first came to Avalon, we know she was 10 or 11. She had said to Vivian that she would be 11 when Midsummer came. And so I believe it was before Midsummer when she came, so she was probably 10 still. So she's close to 19 at this point. She is 18, 19 years old. She will be 19 at Midsummer, which I believe hasn't happened yet. So I think she's 18 at this point, I believe. So it is 9 years after she first comes to Avalon, and Galahad comes back. We find out that she has grown up with Galahad, kind of. That Galahad is who? Do we know who Galahad is? First of all, Galahad is Vivian's son, and who in the story of King Arthur is Galahad? You guys remember? Dun, 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 dun. I hate the lag. Lancelot. That's right. He is Lancelot. In the story of King Arthur, Galahad is Lancelot. He is Vivian's son with King Ban. And their son is a result of the Great Right, which we will talk about towards the end, because that's what chapter 15 was about kind of the Great Right. So he is the result of the Great Right with Vivian and King Ban. So Galahad, as a child, spent a lot of time in Avalon. Vivian specifically wanted him to have kind of a connection to Avalon, because she foresaw that he has some role to play for Avalon. And so after he had spent some time as a child in Avalon, she sent him to King Ban's castle to be fostered there and to raise up and get training in the art of war and be soldiering and that kind of thing. So he does that, and he then, this is the first time that he has been back to Avalon in years and years. So Lancelot and Morgaine are related. Have you guys, I don't know why this question isn't that hard. Well, they're related how, basically, which is Vivian is Morgaine's aunt and the mother of Lancelot. So they are first cousins. Lancelot and Morgaine are first cousins. And Lancelot comes. Vivian sends Morgaine, who now has had quite a bit of priestess training at this point, to handle the barge. Right, they're first cousins. To open the mists for the barge, and to pick up Lancelot and bring him back to the Isle of Avalon. And we see that she is able to do that, that she's done that before, so that she's pretty far advanced in her priestess training. And she goes and gets Lancelot, and she is surprised that she feels kind of a connection to Lancelot, to Galahad. And they form kind of an instant connection. And you know, most of us have had that at some point or another with this fancy saddle. Yes. Lancelot has trained a lot in the art of soldiering, and his specialty, we find out, is kind of equestrian, is horses. And he has learned a lot about the different ways of using horses in warfare. And he has found this fancy saddle that has stirrups, so that men can fight on horseback still. They don't have to get down from their horse to fight. They can use the stirrups to kind of, you know, lean over and fight while they are still on horses, which is a big deal at that time. He learned that from another culture. And so Vivian sends them away and says, why don't you go kind of show Lancelot around and, you know, take some bread and stuff, enjoy the day, and reconnect and catch up. And they form a connection, an instant. Yes, the Scythians. I love that word, the Scythians, or the Scythians. I didn't really think of that. The scythe. That's really, see, now seeing it from Stephen writing it, I didn't think of the scythe. They form an instant connection. They really get along well. They have like attraction to each other, instant physical attraction to each other. And they kind of talk about the old days. Lancelot talks of his life in Britain and his horses, and how he doesn't really believe in, you know, the whole Avalon thing, and he doesn't really want anything to do with it. And Vivian has said to him, you know, that he really needs to come back and train at Avalon now as a bard, and he needs to step up. She has seen that Avalon needs him, and he's like, nah, I don't think so. I almost thought the goddess was mean to let Guinevere through the mist, right? I know it, because they have this wonderful connection, and Morgaine feels this instant connection, and Lancelot feels it too. And they have like this wonderful day together, and they climb these hills together, and Lancelot is kind of enamored with Morgaine, and they fall asleep kind of in each other's arms. But Morgaine is trying really hard to be good, because she knows she has to keep her virginity for the goddess. And so she doesn't allow it to go very far, but she still feels sparks and an instant attraction, and they kind of lay together and fall asleep, and they're holding hands a lot and all this stuff. And then suddenly they hear this cry in the mists, and they think, what the hell is that? And so they both go to investigate, and they find Guinevere. And Guinevere is this young girl, and she has somehow found her way through the mists. She is on Avalon's side, and she's not supposed to be on Avalon's side, so she's lost. She doesn't know how to get back to the other side where the priests are. She has been in the convent on the priestly side of the tour, and she has somehow gotten lost her way, and found her way to Avalon. It reminded me a lot of the stories you hear of the Fae folk. Very often you hear that people lose their way in the mists, that people get confused and find their way in the land of fairies, and they don't know how to get back. And you hear of them, they shouldn't be eating anything because time moves differently, so they could get lost in the land of the Fae. And this is a part of that realm, if you will. And we hear more about that in a couple chapters when we talk about the Great Rite and what happens around that. But that is the same realm that we're talking about. The Fae folk are a part of that. And we've heard now a couple times that Vivian has fairy blood in her, and Morgaine herself has fairy blood in her. She has a they call it a pictish face, the small kind of pointy face, and she's small and dark, and so they have fairy blood in them. And the Isle of Avalon is a part of the realm of fairies, and so here we are. Guinevere has found herself lost and finds her way into the other side of the mist, the Avalon side of the mist. And they, of course, Lancelot is instantly falls in love with Guinevere and is instantly enamored with her. And Morgaine is crushed and jealous, and she keeps talking to herself like, you can see it if it was yourself, like, what the fuck are you doing? Why do I feel like this? Why? Stop it. I'm not even supposed to feel this way over Lancelot. Anyways, I'm a priestess. I'm supposed to be keeping myself with a goddess. I can't just fall in love with a man on a whim. That is not what my destiny is, and my destiny holds other things. And then she's looking at Guinevere, who is like the opposite of her, right? Guinevere, we know that Morgaine is kind of small and dark, and that picked face, kind of a small pointy face, very fairyish. And Guinevere is kind of taller and blonde, and the typical princess. I'll take them the wrong way and let them drown. Yes. She's like, fuck them. We'll just take them the other way, and if they drown, oh well. But Morgaine is very jealous, and is trying really hard to talk herself out of it. But she really just wants to say, kiss off. Gwen calls her ugly. Yes. And then, Guinevere's not very nice. She's like, not very nice at all to her, and calls her ugly. And so, of course, Lancelot says, well, of course, Morgaine here can find your way back to it. Now, Lancelot can't do shit because he cannot control the mists. So he needs Morgaine to bring his beautiful, oh my gosh, I'm so enamored with this blonde goddess, back to her side of the tour. And so, of course, he turns around and says, of course, my cousin here, Morgaine, can do that. Right, Morgaine? And Morgaine is like, yeah, I guess so, asshole. Yeah, we really do feel bad for Morgaine. It's something, like their entire family has to go through shit over and over and over. And you start to feel like, come on, are you kidding me? Lancelot doesn't defend her. Oh, I know, right? Don't you want to just beat the crap out of him? Like, are you kidding me? And Igraine had to go through all this stuff too. And you start to feel like that whole family sometimes has to go through way too much crap. But that's what happens. It's a very long chapter. I loved, the parts with Morgaine and Lancelot though, and their talks, and, the way, middle finger to them. I know it. It was like puppy love, hearing their day together was beautiful. It's a beautiful day together. And then, of course, Guinevere comes in, and we immediately are fuck Guinevere, right? I don't want to deal with Guinevere. So Morgaine, I know, Guinevere's voice, but you don't belong to this horrible place, do you? You don't look like one of the fairy folks. You're not little and ugly. No, she thought he was beautiful, and she little and ugly. Bitch, right? And then I can't come back with you. He has issues with his mother, right? Wouldn't sit next to his mother. Yes. But I don't belong to Avalon. No, well, a cousin of my mother's or something like that. We knew each other when we were children. That's all. I'm not with her at all. I totally can be with you, Guinevere. After spending like the whole day together. Hi, Leanne. And, being enamored with each other. He's like, oh, she's just my cousin. Don't worry about that ugly little thing over there. I'm all yours. I can be yours today. Jerk. And finally, Morgaine gets Guinevere back to her side. And she says, there lies your convent, Guinevere. Be careful to keep to the path, or you may lose yourself in the mists again. And she turns around and she's like, no, fuck off, and back off. And she, thank you to Lancelot, who at least Lancelot says, it's Morgaine you should thank. It is she who knows the paths in and out of Avalon. And she drops a little curtsy. Thank you, Mistress Morgaine. Fuck off. So Morgaine then turns away and says, come on, Lancelot, we need to go. And she surrounds herself. She puts the glamour of the goddess, surrounds herself with the glamour of the goddess again, and kind of turns from Lancelot. And they go back through the mists. And Lancelot notices and says to her, how did you do that? We were having a great time earlier and stuff. Suddenly you look like my mother, which is the goddess, because Vivian is the priestess. And so she has learned to put on the air of the goddess, which is important. That means that she's very trained already in the magics of the priestesshood, and she's able to put the glamour on to say, okay, you can't fuck with me. And that's almost an armor. We learn that the glamour of the goddess, to put on the air of the goddess, kind of protects her. It protects her heart. It means that people see her as intimidating, and so they may not, first of all, they don't fuck with her as much. They see her as intimidating. They see her not as, some beautiful woman that I'm going to come and carry you away. And they see her as the goddess. And it means a lot. And there's something to that, I don't know how to describe it, but that's an important thing, that she is able to do that. And it's a protective armor almost. And I want you to remember that, because that's something that we can all do. There is, I don't know if I would call it a glamour, but there is an energy working that we can all do when we feel that we need protection from the muggle world, so to speak, from the non-magical world, that you can put on that armor of protection, and people will see you differently. They don't necessarily see you as someone they can intimidate, as someone they can take advantage of. Suddenly people will look at you a little differently and think, okay, maybe I don't want to fuck with this person. And so remember that. And it's something that we can work on. Maybe in the Beginner Witch series, we can work on how to put on that air. Because it's something that has helped me in the past, and I kind of forgot to use it recently. And it is something that can help. Yes, you change from looking like a victim to one in charge. Exactly. And people don't want to fuck with you. And there is definitely something to be said for that. Now, I will say that you don't necessarily want to do that all the time, because it also is an armor that means you are not able to connect with someone else's energy like you would if you did not have that air upon you. But when you are in a vulnerable state, sometimes you need that armor to protect you. And there is definitely a time and place for it. Okay, so, good. Next. Chapter 13. Chapter 13, we see Merlin comes to visit, makes a surprise visit to Vivian. Do you remember why Merlin comes? There's something very important that is happening, that Merlin comes to let Vivian know that all of their plans or stuff are really all of a sudden coming to a head. So what's the important thing that happened that Merlin is coming to let Vivian know? Uther is dying. That's right. So after years now of Igraine and Uther being married, we find out that Uther is dying. And his undoing is his pride. And we knew that. We had heard that from earlier chapters, that Uther's pride would be his undoing, and it is. He goes into battle, and I'm clipping the armor part of the live. You got it. And thank you. We find out that he goes into battle where another king may not have. And while that was good maybe for the kingdom, it meant that he took a fatal wound, and he has an infection now and a fever, and he's dying. And it's funny, there's a great back and forth here between Vivian and the Merlin. And it starts out with her calling him father. And he kind of notices right away that that's unusual. Vivian does not usually call him father. And she says, I know I don't usually do that, but maybe I need you to be here as a father right now. So Vivian is feeling vulnerable, and feels like she may need like that father figure for a moment. And she keeps trying to put that off. She keeps trying to, maybe not really, I'm okay, all that stuff. But deep down, she's feeling vulnerable. What did I write down? We see her. This is what I want to say about this. If you have ever been in, and I don't know, let me just finish one sentence. Hold on. Sometimes some of this stuff comes up that I never know whether to open it up to everyone or to kind of hold this in for myself. And when you become a priestess or a leader of a group of people, you take on a responsibility to those people and to their learning. And especially when it's a spiritual learning, there is, and I've talked a little bit about this before, but there is a loneliness that happens, and a being of being set apart from everyone else. And it's not that you think you're better or you think you're above them or anything, but there is a separation that needs to happen because you are responsible for their learning, and that's a great weight. If you take it seriously, it's a great weight. And so then there's a loneliness that happens with that, and sometimes it comes to a head and you feel like, what the fuck am I doing this for? There are times that things happen that you think, did I really choose this path? Even if you feel like this is your life path, there is a vulnerability that happens sometimes that you wouldn't normally get unless you were put into that position of authority and responsibility. So me being a priestess, I really liked that glimpse of vulnerability that we see in Vivian, because so often we see her as this hard priestess person who like makes decisions, even though she sees the decisions that she has to make as, the goddess has made this decision, and so I am pushing forth the goddess's will. We see that she sometimes is vulnerable too and thinks, oh my gosh, have I done the right thing? Am I sure? Because she sees the path of destruction that she has put upon Igraine. And she says, something about, did I highlight it? No, I didn't highlight it. She keeps saying, but what if this happened? What if I had been the woman who had the child with Uther? And Taliesin shakes his head and says, no, that's not how it was supposed to happen. And he says, and who would have ruled Avalon in those years had you chosen a crown in the Christian lands? And if I had ruled them at Uther's side, they would not have been Christian lands. I thought Igraine would have power over him and use it for Avalon. And Taliesin is like, why are you... Yes, with great power comes great responsibility. Exactly. And Taliesin sees that she's kind of suffering. And he keeps trying to tell her it's not your fault, that she doesn't feel loved. Yes, but Morgaine loves her, but won't soon. Exactly. Vivian, you must not blame her. Remember this, say for the birth of her child. I never thought to hear that of Igraine. Oh, I offered her this. Oh, he starts talking about Igraine's piousness, her Christian piousness now. She is so, after being yanked around and all that stuff, we see that she never does go back to the ways of Avalon. After all of that up and down that happened, all the, yanking of her chain, she remains a pious Christian woman after that, to a fault, and kind of denounces her Avalon upbringing, and says, Merlin says, I asked her what would become of her after Uther's death, and when she had been done weeping for that, she said she would retire into a convent. I offered her the shelter of Avalon, where she could be near to her daughter, but she said it would not be seemly for a Christian queen. And Vivian's smile hardens a little. I never thought to hear that of Igraine. And he says, Vivian, you must not blame her, even in thought, for what you yourself have wrought. Avalon cast her out when she most needed it. Would you chide the girl because she has found comfort in a simpler faith than ours? I find it hilarious and telling that the Merlin feels that the Christian faith is simpler than ours. I guess hi, how are you? Haven't haven't seen you on here since the pandemic. I have been on less than I used to be, for sure. I used to be on 3-4 days a week, huh? But I'm here and I'm restarting a whole bunch. So welcome back. I doubt it. You are the only man in all of Britain who could speak of the High Queen as a girl, she says to Merlin. And he says to me, Vivian, even you are a little girl at times, that same little girl who used to climb on my knee and touch the strings of my harp. And so Vivian feels very bad about her role in yanking Igraine's chain back and forth. We see her vulnerability, fearing that the things she had to do for the goddess that hurt Igraine were for naught. She's worried now because they know that Uther is dying. And so Arthur is it. Arthur is the one. He has to be the one. And they start to talk about what needs to happen, what Arthur needs to go through in order to become king of all the tribesmen. Remember that he's the one that they foresaw that can bring the tribesmen together with all the Christian people of Britain. And so this is the first time we hear of what needs to happen. And all we know so far is that there's to be a testing. And Vivian is terrified that he will not make it through the testing, that he will fail. And she says several times, or Merlin says several times, what do we do if he fails? And Vivian keeps saying he can't fail. And Merlin says, and if he fails? And she says, she sighed, no doubt Lot is ready if it should come to that. So they do have a backup plan, but he can't fail. The point is, they have set this all up. They need this to work, and Arthur cannot fail. He has to succeed at this test. And so that's the beginning of what we hear. It's heartbreaking to me. Vivian's vulnerability is heartbreaking. She's a woman who has put herself in the life of service to the goddess, and sometimes the life of service means hardships a lot, because the responsibility is great, and it's difficult. So we go to chapter 14, and chapter 14 begins the great hunt, and this is what I really wanted. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk about. I was really excited to start talking about the great hunt because it comes at a perfect time. Our next Sabbath of the year as pagans, if you are a pagan, our next Sabbath is May 1st, which is Beltane. And Beltane represents the great hunt, the great marriage, the joining together of the god and goddess, of the horned one and the maiden hunter. And we see this in its earliest form. We see where this has come from. We see how this has come to be. We see why the rituals that we perform on Beltane today, where they came from, and why they were thought of to be necessary in that time. And so the horned god and the maiden huntress have to meet and be together in the great marriage. By the way, the last thing that happens, remember to hydrate, thank you. The last thing that happens, I think it's hilarious, and I thought that I highlighted it, but maybe I didn't. It's hilarious that they kind of laugh together. They talk about what happens, and Vivian says he will meet the mother when he is triumphant, and from her hand he will take the sword of victory. But first he must prove his own, and must first meet with the maiden huntress. A flicker of a smile crosses her face. And no matter what happens after that, she said, we will take no such chance as we did with Uther and Igraine. We shall make certain of the royal blood, whatever comes of it later. So they have a little, I see them as going, ha-ha, We have made it, and hopefully the goddess has been the catalyst for this, but we see them doing this little haha moment. We're not gonna let people think that there's no royal blood in the next king that is born. And the way they're going to do that is to rig the system and make it so the child that, or a child at least, that comes from this is definitely of royal blood. Royal blood from the tribes. And the way that they're going to do that is they rig the system so that Morgaine, who is of the royal bloodline, and Arthur are going to join in the Great Rite. So, we see Morgaine. Morgaine starts to, we see this ritual happen. She walks up to the Tor, and they have this this huge ritual. She's never been asked to be the head of the ritual like this before. She's not exactly sure what is going to happen in this ritual. And they go up and they take part in herbs that is supposed to open the sight. So we're not sure what those herbs are. I will tell you that from her reaction to them, I have some ideas of what they probably were at the time. But the reaction is everyone who takes them gets violently ill, throwing up, does not feel good, but it does open their sight. And so they're given the herbs, her and Raven, and Vivian also. And so their sight is opened, and we see Raven have this prophecy. Now, Raven is has been trained as a priestess before Morgaine even got there. She had gotten her blue crescent between her on her third eye. And Raven, who is supposed to be silent, she took a vow of silence, suddenly speaks. And this is the only time we hear Raven speak, is through this prophecy. She starts spouting this prophecy. She starts screaming, and she starts talking about blood and the horned one, and it's kind of a little cryptic, and we're not really sure at first what the heck this is about. And then it ends, and we see Morgaine back there, and I don't know about you, but I was thinking, gosh, I can't remember exactly what that was. But thank goodness right after that we hear about it, right? So Morgaine is sick. She's been vomiting. She doesn't feel good. Vivian calls for her, and she goes to her house, and she ends up throwing up at her house. She tried to take milk and bread or something in the morning. She ends up throwing up at her house. What I thought this was good. What does Vivian give Morgaine after she throws up to make her feel better? Which I thought was hilarious, because I don't know, it's like kind of hair of the dog, right? She goes to Vivian's house. She throws up outside Vivian's house. She comes back in. Vivian gives her a little glass of something and says, here, sip on this. And it is most likely brandy or whiskey of some sort, which is supposed to settle her stomach, which I found very funny. But the brandy, she talks about it making her warm and kind of feel warm and comforted. Vodka, hair of the dog, that's right. And so she gives her whiskey or brandy. We start to, and then they talk about the prophecy. And she says, Vivian says to Morgaine, did you understand what Raven was saying, what the prophecy was? And Morgaine says, a little bit, but not really. Okay, so here we go. So this is, we're going to talk about the prophecy, because this is, in a nutshell, this is what we celebrate at Beltane. So this is a great view of what we're looking at Beltane. The fairy people lived in Avalon before the Druids. So before the Druids even existed, before they labeled what they did as a religion or as a way of life. The little fairy people lived in Avalon before that. Before they treated their tenants as a religion. They lived on the fruit of the land and hunting deer. In other words, they didn't know how to plant. They talk about planting barley and harvesting barley, and they didn't understand that. So they only lived on what the land was giving them. And then they hunted deer in the wintertime so that they could survive the winter on the meat of the deer. They had no king. They only had a queen who was their mother. They hadn't learned yet to call her the goddess. I always think of Mother Gaia. For me, Mother Gaia is like this. Just one mother over all, kind of the end-all be-all of the goddesses. That was their queen. The queen and priestess and the priestesses learned to call the deer to her and ask their spirits that they might give their lives in sacrifice for the lives of the tribe. So truly a sacrifice of love at that point. They knew that in order to survive, they had to eat the meat of the deer. And rather than just going out and killing what they needed to eat, they learned to call the deer to them and ask the deer for a sacrifice. Is there one of you who would step forward as a sacrifice so that we all might live? And the deer would do that. The deer would choose one that would be the sacrifice to keep the balance of, nature and of the universe. One of the tribe must take the chance that the deer could, if they choose, take his life in exchange. So the balance of every year going to the deer, calling the deer forward and saying, is one of you willing to step forward as a sacrifice? The deer says, yes, this is the sacrificial deer this year. And in return, one of the tribe was chosen, one a year, to be the sacrifice for that year, if the deer chose. If the deer chose, then the deer would slay the tribe's member before he was slain. So the mother chose every year her consort, the sacrificial tribe member. So after the great rite, every year, the mother would then, like I would assume the next day, very quickly thereafter, choose next year's consort. So in other words, a whole year would go by and the entire tribe knew that next year's sacrificial tribesman was Bob. So Bob spent the whole year as the consort, the goddess's consort, the sacrificial tribesman. Because they knew ahead of time that he was giving of himself, that he was willing to die for the tribe, for the good of the rest of the tribe. This tribesman was willing to give his life. They treated him with great respect, and he got the best of everything for that year, knowing that at the end of the year he may sacrifice his life. He may have to sacrifice his life for the rest of the tribe. Any questions so far? You guys with me still? He agreed to give up his life. The tribe gave them of their lives. He ate abundantly, it says, even if the children at the breast were starved. So above all, he was revered above all others for that year, the consort was. All of the women of the tribe were his to lie with, so that he, the strongest and best, might sire the best children. So we see an insight, the goddess chooses the strongest, the best. And that says something when you are going to sacrifice something for your faith, for your gods, for your goddesses. It is not something little to you. It should not be something that already doesn't mean anything. I think of, as a former Catholic, I think of Lent. I don't eat vegetables. I just don't. So it would be a horrible sacrifice for me to give up vegetables for Lent, right? Same thing with us. Anything that we are willing to sacrifice for our gods and goddesses and universe and whatever should be something that actually means something. The goddess then chose the highest and best, chose the strongest of the tribe, chose the most perfect of the tribe as the consort for that year. He had his choice of all the maidens. When the year had passed, he put on the antlers of the deer and wore the robe of the untanned deer skin, so that the deer would think him one of their own. So the tribesmen tied antlers to his head. They drape a untanned, in other words, they cut it off the deer, and it was not, it doesn't have chemicals on it or anything. And they drape that over his shoulders so that the deer hopefully would think that was one of their own when they go to run. And they run with the herd. The mother huntress then puts the spell upon the deer. It's time to run. So they have this set course that all of the deer run this set course. And their job, all of those deer, their job is to sniff out the imposter, to sniff out the consort. And so the maiden huntress, her job is to put a spell over all of the deer so that they cannot sniff out the consort, in hopes that the consort then would survive the journey. Sometimes then the king stag, the actual king of the deer population, would sniff out the imposter, the horned one, the consort, and kill him. And then the horned one would die. Sometimes the spell was good enough and the consort was good enough that they would make it through their journey and he would survive the day. Any questions yet? You guys with me? You're on board? So Vivian says to her, time has moved on and this blood sacrifice isn't needed every year. You know, we know how to grow barley and how to grow our own crops and stuff. So this sacrifice doesn't have to happen every year, but it still does have to happen once in a while. In times of great peril, the tribes demand such a leader. And Raven has foreseen that this is such a time. So her prophecy means, this is the new leader has to go through this trial and survive this trial in order for the tribes to accept him as king. So what tribes are we talking about? We are talking about the fairy folk, all of the fairy, all of the northern tribes, which is the rest of the pagan people, and all of the realm of fairies, all have decided that this is what needs to happen in order for them to be behind Arthur, which of course at this point we're not sure, but and of course Vivian doesn't tell Morgaine that it's going to be Arthur, right? Because the whole point is you don't know who the horned one is going to be. And so this is what has to happen. So finally, in the 15th chapter, our last chapter for the evening, we see finally this great rite, the great marriage, which is what we celebrate at Beltane. The tribes of the fairy folk, and I love all the little details. I have to do some research and see if anyone has done, I wish I could do art, because I would love to do some paintings and such of the fairy folk that she talks about in this chapter. You know, the mother, the priestess of the fairy folk has such an interesting look, and the paintings that they have painted on themselves and on their furs, and just the descriptors in this chapter were great. Love the descriptions of all the symbols and stuff. And all the tribes of the north have been given a great leader, and he will be tested by the ancient rite. testing for one who runs the risk of death for his people, so that they will follow him unto death. The blue markings, yes. Question, did you know about the loneliness and separation before you became a high priestess? Thank you, Jackie. That's a good idea. I should ask him to do that. That's a good idea. I didn't really think of that. It's harder on the road, but I do have colored pencils and stuff. I don't think you can ever know the extent. I think I might have guessed that there would be some of that. I don't think until you're in those shoes, I don't think you fully get it. I don't think you fully understand until you step into that role and things happen to you that you suddenly realize, wow, okay, this really sucks. Having gone through some of that in the last 3 years, a lot of that, I will say that I still believe it's worth it. I still believe that the teachings that I feel I'm supposed to be teaching, that I feel I have a calling to teach, are worth everything that I have been through and whatever else I have to go through going forward. But I don't know if anybody could ever foresee some of the loneliness and the, there are some dark nights. The nights for me are hardest because it's, that darkness. And I say that knowing that darkness has also been a friend to me. And sometimes I feel like darkness gives us a hug and you're able to kind of sink into anonymity for a while, which is comforting. But also the darkness makes you feel more alone. And so there are times that I think, really want this? Is this really my path? I don't think I ever question my path as a whole. Sometimes I'm like, do I really want to continue? Like, you question the branches of the path. You question how you've gone about completing the stuff that you think that you're called to do. But I don't ever question the journey that I'm on. For the most part. I have my moments, for sure. Okay. If he survives, so if Arthur survives, it will depend to some extent on the strength of the maiden huntress, who is Morgaine. Morgaine's ability to cast the spell on the other deer, so that the other deer don't realize that there is, who the imposter is among them, that will help Arthur to survive. Then he will become the horned one, the king stag, consort of the virgin huntress, crowned with the antlers of the god. They spend a lot of time, I was going to say really quickly, they spend a lot of time here talking about outside time and space, which if you have seen any of my rituals, when we cast a circle, that's one of the biggest reasons I cast circles when I do, is because it puts that place in a protective bubble almost, outside time and space, so that nothing can penetrate and interfere with what is supposed to happen, and nothing that's supposed to happen can be outside of that ritual area and space. We see that Morgaine goes into a trance, and that she sees the horned one kill the king stag. He also gets a cut on his side, but he is able to kill the king stag in the end. And so his reward then is Morgaine, is the virgin huntress. And Morgaine gives up her maidenhood as she consented to do, as Vivian has told her the goddess, has put forth in her path. and they lie together, and this gets a little tricky because of the content, right? We find out later that they are brother and sister. We don't know necessarily at the time that they are brother and sister, but we find out later that they are. The thing is, if you believe in the great right, then you believe that that Morgaine is not Morgaine anymore. She is the goddess. And that Arthur was not Arthur at that point. He is the horned god. We, as pagans, a lot of us practice this once in a while. It's not something that I would say I practice a lot. I have done it several times in my 20 years as a pagan. A couple times as what we call drawing down the moon. You draw down the moon into you and you become the moon goddess, or the energy of the goddess through the moon. This is the same kind of thing. So you are acting as the goddess in that moment. Arthur was acting as the horned one in that moment. And so they believe that that anything that comes of that, yes, she was the goddess, not his sister, exactly. They believe that anything that comes from that union then is ordained by the god and goddess, is ordained by the horned god and the virgin huntress, and therefore is now royal blood, made from royal blood and royal blood, but is now of the goddess herself. So they do that. They are able to make love in that moment. They don't recognize each other. And then they wake in the morning. They're both exhausted. They fall asleep in each other's arms. And they wake in the moment, and now they are themselves. And before they really talk at all, a little bit, they talk a little. And they kind of joke about it a little. And they're like, well, you know, I guess I was the goddess. I guess I was the god. Why don't we do it once as each, you know, as ourselves? Because now I see you and you're a beautiful woman. And, you know, I'll always love you as the goddess now. And even if I never see you again, I will always love you as the goddess. And so how about it? And she's like, okay, sure. That was fun. Sure, let's do it again. So they do it again. And then something that Morgaine does. Morgaine pulls Arthur's head in and like strokes his hair. She does something specific. She pulls him in and holds him. Where are we? Oh yeah, we're in the cave. So I don't suppose I'll ever meet you again. Morgaine reaches for her garment and tenderly dries his tears, cradling his head against her. And that was something she had done for her little brother when her mother, Igraine, would have her take care of her little brother. She did that as, you know, his big sister. And he suddenly goes, oh, you are Morgaine. And she realizes, oh fuck, you're Arthur. And so the end of the chapter is both of them looking at each other and despairing. They really kind of are both crying, although Morgaine says to him, don't cry. It's all right. Don't cry, my brother, my beloved, my little one, don't cry, it's all right. But even as she soothed him, despair beat at her. Why did you do this to us, great mother lady? Why? And she did not know whether she was calling to Vivian or to the goddess. So the end of the chapter is both of them looking at each other like, are you fucking kidding me? You are my brother. We're not supposed to do this. And they both know this. And just so you are aware, they both believe that that is not right either. So as we go into the next chapters, I can't remember how much they go into this, but I will say that we have to remember the conversation that Taliesin and Vivian have, and the hardships that Taliesin and Vivian had with Igraine and everything that they made Igraine go through. And they didn't want that again. They didn't want Igraine. There was always a question as to whether Arthur was actually Uther's child, because technically, when Arthur was conceived, Igraine was still married to Gorlois. And so, and then Arthur was born early. On top of it, he was always a sickly child. He was little and blah, 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 and all this stuff. So there was always a question of, did Igraine really father Uther's child, and that's Arthur? We find out also in these chapters that Igraine had a miscarriage, had another son, and it only lived like 4 days. So she was never able to father another son, and there was always a question. And Vivian and the Merlin, and through them the goddess, did not want that question ever to be there. They wanted to make sure that the royal blood was certain. And so in this way, they know that any child that comes from this union will have royal blood, period, without any question, because they both are of royal blood. Does it make it right? I don't know. That's an ethical question that we can talk about as we go through the next chapters. It's certainly skeevy, right? It certainly makes you go, ew. Now, it was a different time. Cousins were able to marry. They were not raised together. And don't forget that they are half brother and sister. They don't have the same fathers. So they are only half. They have the same mother, but not the same fathers. And they were not raised together. So it's not as if they were raised together and always knew each other and just fell into bed together. There's a lot of alternating circumstances there. Again, I'm not trying to say that made it right. But I can see where Vivian and Taliesin wanted that certainty, so that they didn't have to go through all of the questioning that comes upon the kingdom now. Okay. First of all, there's 13 of you on. If you would all click the like button for me. It's been over an hour. Oh my goodness. In the next chapters, we are going through, next time we will be going 16 and 17. We only do 2 chapters, and we will be on next week. So next week's chapters are 16 and 17. And then we will talk about them then. I do want to continue. I'm sure I will be doing a Beltane video. This is such a great chapter to reread for Beltane. 15. Chapter 15 is a great chapter to reread for Beltane, because it really puts into light the essence of what Beltane is. It is a sacrifice. It is a celebration of a coming together for the greater good, for the fertility of the land. We talk a lot about, to make sure that the crops are fertile, the farmers would have sex in the fields. And this sacrifice that happens was for the tribesmen, for each other, so that they knew that their king, that their ruler would die for them, and they that in turn then would fight with their lives for him. Any questions, guys? I'm so excited to be in California so that I can start doing more videos. I'm all ready to do probably 3 videos. So I will be trying to work on them before the weekend. No, let's not say that. Today's Wednesday. because I have a sale to try to do Friday and maybe Saturday. So I will be working on them, though. I will try to do at least one before the weekend. How's that? I'm really glad that, yes, it is the perfect season. I'm so excited. I'm really glad that we got to these chapters. Yay! You're welcome. I love you guys. I love going through this story. There's so many things in my faith and in my journey that came from this book, and the power and the imagination and the energy that comes from this book really set me on my path in a big way. I will also tell you that if any of you are interested in being a Sister of Avalon, they are specifically for women, for anyone who identifies as a woman. But I believe their portal is open now. So if you want to apply to be a sisterhood in the Sisterhood of Avalon, and you look that up, their portal is open until Beltane, I believe, now. I will tell you ahead of time that it is a lot of work. So make sure you have time for it, because it is a lot of work to become a Sister of Avalon. There is a lot that goes into it. I'm not trying to dissuade you at all. I loved it. I was very glad to have done that, which is why I'm bringing it up, because if you want to, now is the time. So go ahead and look that up. It was one of the greatest things that I did in the beginning of my journey. So thank you, Leanne. I love you, honey. I love you guys. Thank you for joining me. I'm really, really glad to be doing this with you all, because I just love this book, and it really has set me on my path in a big way. And have a great night and a great weekend if I don't see you before then, but I'm really going to try to at least come on one more time. Tomorrow's Thursday, right? Maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll come on tomorrow. All right. Good night. I love you guys. Have a great one.